moderator of the next panel, and panelists, so please come up there. Yeah, and as you're coming in, please come forward and grab a seat, and so you don't have to stand in the back.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Our panel is getting seated, and we'll begin in just a moment. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sinkoff. Again, on behalf of the Port of Oakland, our Board of Port Commissioners, all of the staff of the Port of Oakland, the Bay Planning Coalition, and my planning committee, we are delighted that you're all here this morning at the Port of Oakland and in Oakland. We're starting off this morning. Our first panel is the dredging panel. And the reason we wanted to focus on dredging, of course, dredging has been a key concern of the Bay Planning Coalition. It's been one of the major focuses of the work of the coalition through its entire history. And it was relevant through all the years of Bay Planning's history, and it's very, very relevant today. In terms of how we'd like the panel to work, if you recall from last year, we developed a somewhat new format. We hope it's a format that's more engaging, which is to really focus on the remarks of the panelists. So we've asked them, to the extent that it's even possible, given the complexity of the subject, to limit their PowerPoint and really use the PowerPoint as a tool to really discuss the major issues that they have. So we hope this works again this year. The way I'd like to go about the panel is very, very simply, we have a very distinguished panel. Their curriculum vitae and bios are all in the program, so I won't spend a lot of time introducing them because I think that we really want to hear what they have to say. We'll do the applause at the very end as a thank you. Each panelist is going to present a different facet, a different perspective on the dredging challenges that we have. And then we will hopefully have a robust conversation. So for that reason, we'd like you to start thinking about the questions, use those blue cards. Let's make it very provocative, very, very challenging, because the whole purpose of Bay Planning is to come together as a community and raise the issues that are going to allow us to effectively move forward on the specific issues that our maritime and industrial sector are facing here in San Francisco Bay. Let me just sort of highlight a few things that I think we are facing as challenges right now with dredging, and then we'll start with our panel. So, as everyone knows, the cost of dredging is going up, and we continue to face a series of obstacles, including a diminished amount of funding, a need for more streamlined processes, and of course, availability of disposal options. We also really need a protocol to deal with emergency dredging events that occur outside the windows that have been established. So there's really a set of issues that we're facing. When we talked about dredging as part of the conference, we really wanted to underscore the fact that we consider the channels to be the backbone infrastructure for the maritime industrial sector. It's often, for many people, invisible. It gets done, but we all depend upon it, and we depend upon a stable dredging protocol and system in order to grow these sectors. Tearing off what Jacques said about the unpredictability of projections and forecasts, certainly at the Port of Oakland and at the other ports of the region, we know that. Obviously we had a very, very large increase. We had good growth up until 2007, and then there was a real drop-off, and now we're all predicting very modest growth, but still that is subject to offering competitive value for the services that we provide in a very competitive marketplace, not only regionally, obviously in California, throughout the West Coast, and even internationally. So given the unpredictability with markets, with trade patterns, our belief is that what we have to provide is stability in terms of infrastructure, and dredging is at the core of that. So with that, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Jim, I guess you're going to be up first. And Jim, as you know, is an emeritus at the Port of Oakland. He's now a commissioner both at BCDC, and he's on the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and he will provide us with perspective. Thanks, Jim.
Jim stole my sentence. I want to thank Richard and John for inviting me. Can you hear me? Is this? I can. You want to adjust the level, or you want me to adjust the level? I can do either one. Yes. Okay. It won't surprise anybody that knows me to hear me say much the same things as a BCDC commissioner that I said as the department manager at the Port of Oakland. Everybody at the Port of Oakland knows that I wouldn't speak to a script, and I'm not going to speak to a script to accept it.
Speak into the microphone.
So, better?
Yes.
All right. I can pick it up if I need to. I've given you a cheat sheet. I'm going to give you a couple corrections for that. So I'm going to have to tell you that. Throw that away. Kind of take that with you. But I'm going to start with a joke, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about teaching first and fourth graders. Talk about the lunch that I had on Monday with some of my mentors on coastal issues. Talk a little bit about what I see when I look at the bay, and that's really the heart of my understanding. Then I'm going to try to tie it all together with the conclusion about why you need feasible ways to send it back into the bay. Now, to start with the joke. This is a way to try to get you guys to buy this. This is hysterical. I bent over laughing and made a fool of myself in the bookstore. It's called Effing Exams, the very best totally wrong testing to true tests. So I'm gonna give you just one from the math test. The test question was this. You were at a friend's party. 6 cupcakes are distributed on 9 plates, and there's no more than 1 cake per plate. What is the probability of receiving a plate with a cake on it? The best F answer was none. My sister was invited too. I love my sister, but I'm still telling the joke. This time of the year, I spend about 15 hours a week on a day and about 20 hours a week teaching elementary school reading and math. It brings me to, I think, my first point. As someone who looks at the day with coastal engineer's eyes and daily experience, what do I see? How do I explain it to others? Physical facts seem obvious to me, but they're less obvious to others. And in a minute, I'm going to show you slides if we try to do that. But next I'm going to tell you a little about the importance of mentoring and simplifying messages. On Monday, I had lunch with Joe Bodovitz, Phyllis Faber, and Dan. Joe was, of course, the first executive director of BCDC, the first executive director of the Coastal Commission. Bill was chief staff counsel at the commission when I was there, and Phyllis was the North Coast Region Coastal Commission. These have been mentors for my life. Particularly Phyllis, who has been one of the biologists that's guided me as to how to approach restoring wetlands. And we had also invited Sylvia McGrath, but she had some health issues and wasn't able to attend. I was told by David Lewis that she lived to the Oakland So I think she's hanging in there pretty well for somebody at number 5. All 4 of these people have provided these sounding boards for mentorship in coastal issues, both in terms of how you approach those issues, but how you teach about them. And I want to invoke them in particular because one of the things that Phyllis said at our lunch was exactly the same thing that I'm going to say. We need to use dredge material to cope with erosion in the bay. She has the Port of Madeira marshes in mind. So now we're going to bring up the slides, and if we have the first one there. I don't believe I have a pointer. All right, we are looking at San Pablo Bay, and one of the things that I want to show you on the left-hand margin, if you look carefully, you can see Sonoma Bay. It's the first habitat restoration project I worked on. And I want to thank David Lewis for suggesting I go out and see it because I did that on Saturday with my wife, and it's doing really nice things, and it used dredge material. But of equal importance is if you look on the right side of San Pablo Bay and you look at that nice arced shoreline, not everybody knows that shoreline is about 100 feet broader than it used to be. And if you look at the mouth of the Carquinez Strait, you'll see a long jetty. There's thousands of acres of wetlands that were created by the bay, introducing excess sediments coming out of the Great Valley, down and into the middle of San Pablo Bay, and redistributed by the tides, and particularly the wind waves. So we have, in that system, an extra 100 yards across, about 100 million cubic yards of sediment. It wasn't designed, it was put there by nature, an important lesson. Can I have the next slide? Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the little marsh at the base of the Bay Bridge. Another one of those inadvertent accidents of nature. This shows the old ferry mole and the island when it was an island. This is about 1918, if you have known. These few slides show you the construction. Like, have the next slide, please. These show you that at the original time, this was very shallow water, but there was no marsh. Next slide. And next, you can see there the construction of the footings for the Bay Bridge. Now, at that time, they just side cast the sediment, just threw it on the side. Didn't think of it as a resource, didn't think of it as something that's an environmental problem. And let's go on. Now, if you look up on the above the Port of Oakland there and above the toll plaza, you'll see a marsh, habitat for endangered species, clapper rail. The only place I've ever seen clapper rail is in the marshes in San Pablo Bay. But I know they're at this place. So I look at what nature has done inadvertently, or what nature has done systematically, for what we've done inadvertently. And so I'm going to try to give you the take-home messages and tie all these things together. The purpose of giving you the joke was not only to set you in the right mood, but to remind us all that if we don't study, we won't get it, no matter how clever and witty we are. There's lots of witty things in here, but people really didn't study. For me, that means looking at the forces that have shaped the bay, both over geological timescales and with the more recent perturbations that can readily be seen in the slides that I showed you. Rivers have been bringing sediment, mostly mud, to the bay for over 13,000 years. Waves, mostly wind waves, from the interaction between the Pacific continent and the Great Central Valley heat, have been redistributing that sediment for the same 13,000 years. We can look at the way that we introduce sediment to the bay inadvertently, as in the construction of the bay, and see how the waves put it in exactly the right place to form a marsh and ask us to meet the endangered clapper rail. Essentially the same thing happened on San Pablo Bay. Will Travis once told me that he couldn't let me put dredge material back into the bay in the vague hope that it would wind up in the right place. Therein, I think, is the difference between a coastal engineer and an architect. I study the way that nature has been placing sediment into the bay for the past 13,000 years in river deltas and other ways, and what we've done accidentally. And I understand that it's the forces of tides and waves, not hope, that is putting that sediment exactly where it needs to be. I do have a correction on the costs. The estimated cost of 50-foot project with habitat restoration was 20 million more in ocean disposal. Naturally, it was probably 80 million in construction. So that project came very close to not happening. We have to find more economical ways to do dredging, and we need to figure out ways to incorporate our understanding of what nature does and the limitations of feasibility and put those into our regional plans. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Next up, we will have our San Francisco District Commander from the Army Corps of Engineers.
And efficient waterborne transportation systems for the movement of commerce, national security needs, and recreation. If you can click the build real quick. Of particular importance is the routine maintenance of our deep draft channels. That's where the most economic benefit comes out. They're highlighted in red here, and these channels are the San Francisco Harbor, or the main ship channel. We keep that depth at 55 feet. The Oakland Harbor, keeping this depth to 50 feet. The Richmond Harbor, where all oil and refineries occur, keeping that to 45 to 38 feet. San Pablo Bay, otherwise known as Pinole Shoal, and also important for the oil refineries, keeping that to 35 feet. Sassoon Bay and Channel and New York Slough, keeping that to 35 feet. And then lastly, Redwood City, keeping that to 28 to 30 feet, maintained every 2 years. With years of stagnant O&M budgets, it's critical to maintain the channels in an efficient and effective manner. The Corps prioritizes what channels we do pretty much by tonnage of cargo going through it. So when Congressman Thompson says, hey, I really need Napa dredged, Napa's not happening. There's not a dollar of commerce that goes through Napa. If there's money on Napa, it'll get routed to one of these harbors to keep efficient commerce moving out. Next slide. All right. Over the past year and a half, we've been making strides to improve the efficiency of the Corps' O&M program with a VE study that Rick Rhoads was going to talk about. With combined and ongoing efforts, the Corps is kind of leading the way for dredging in the San Francisco Bay. Starting this year, we're starting pre-solicitation conferences for all dredging contracts. Last year, we had Oakland that gets paid to go to the Deepwater Ship Channel. I'm sorry. Oakland gets paid to go to Deepwater disposal site 50 miles off. So we're lucky in that Congress says, hey, the authorized disposal site is past the Farallon Islands. That gives us flexibility. So Dutra, our contractor, came up with a way, hey, I know how we can have beneficial reuse. You give me a portion to go to Alcatraz, I'll send a portion to Montezuma wetlands for beneficial reuse. And I think it came down to about 25% to Alcatraz and 75% to Montezuma wetlands. So what we're going to try to do this year is to have a pre-solicitation conference before we lay out our contracts and say, how would you like the contracts to be laid out by bidding items so we can find the best and most efficient way to bid out the contracts. Trying to do that in the most cost-competitive manner. Next thing we're working on knockdowns, or barring of shoals is a useful tool to maintain the navigation depth between dredging events. It helps reduce unnecessary dredging, one of the LTMS goals. Reduce unnecessary dredging. So how do you do that? To us, it's more knockdowns or more advanced maintenance dredging. So it used to extend the life of the projects already on multi-year dredging cycles or to reduce shoals that are obstructions or hazards to navigation. Developing our in-house capability using the Dillard ship to perform this work increases our ability to perform our navigation mission and provide safe, reliable, and efficient transportation systems. BCDC has already written up procedures for pre-authorization of knockdowns. So if you're getting a 10-year permit from the Corps, BCDC, make sure you ask for it. Hey, I would like pre-authorization of knockdowns. And they write it up. Can't remember what the specifics are, but they give you a percentage of how much material would be moved and they'll give you the thumbs up. This is your limit, what you can do for knockdowns. It's a 10-year permit. That's pretty good flexibility. The final 3 points on the slide are related to the regulatory conditions of dredging in the San Francisco Bay and how to change the conditions so that dredging is more efficient. Last year, can't remember, I had a representative from DiCiro come up to me and say, you know, when I do dredging and you're limiting me to 15 minutes of decant of water, I've got 60% of a dredge going all the way out to the deep ocean water disposal site full of water. If that's what you want me to do, I'll salute you right on and charge you for it. And I think BCDC and the other LTMS boards were like, that's probably not the most efficient use of the dredging dollar. It increases dredging because we have to keep dredging because all we're doing is moving water out. So we've got an ongoing study with the Engineering Research and Development Center with the Corps of Engineers to evaluate the barge overflow restrictions on a dredging project. The study will evaluate the restrictions are effective in reducing suspended sediment, or if we keep going 25, 30 minutes, is the sediment consistent with the what's down there already? So we're looking at that, seeing if we can work with the water board to get more decant time. All right, most dredging projects are required to conduct sediment testing every 3 years. We've been successful in extending that testing cycle at times. For example, we're just finishing up Oakland 50-foot O&M. So pretty much not that much sediment down there. But now is the time, February was the time to do sediment testing, to get on board to do dredging in August. So, I'll know, can we extend the sediment testing? Yes, we can, because there's pretty much nothing there in order to dredge during the environmental work windows. Lastly, the Corps is also working on, within the context of LTMS, to refine the procedures for the approval of advanced maintenance dredging, with the goals of allowing more efficient dredging at a reduced frequency and improved channel reliability. Jesse Burton Evans in the back over here is working those issues, and it'll be similar to the pre-write-up for knockdown dredging. My last slide. All right, last thing I want to talk about is the LTMS program. It's been 12 years it's been going on. We've been working with Jim Hausner, CMAC, and John Coleman of Bay Planning Coalition to get the insights from industry and the ports and help influence the next 6 to 12 years of LTMS. I think LTMS has been a success. You have a lot of programmatic regulations that have come through, Essential Fish Habitat and Endangered Species Act, making it more efficient. Last two things I want to talk about and introduce. I have 2 months left with the Corps of Engineers. My change of command is June 28th. My replacement back here, if you could stand up, John Baker. He's sitting next to the former DE, Lynn Cardozo, back there. And then the dredging program manager, Jessica Burton Evans, and the LTMS PM for USACE Alpenicia. Feel free to reach out and talk to any of them while we're here. And lastly, like I said last year, on regulatory issues for land or DMMO for USACE, we're here to help balance the economic growth with environmentally sound practices. So I get about 6 phone calls a year saying, can you expedite this permit? If it's done, if it's a matter of, just faxing it out and getting it to you and it saves you $10 million or $20,000 at the county level or the city level, give us a call. We're here to help. We're here to balance your needs. So I think John Baker, the new colonel, feels the same way. Give us a call and we'll get it through as much as we can. Thank you.
I think it would be appropriate right now to give a round of applause for Lieutenant Colonel Torrey and DiCiro for his service. We're going to miss you. When you got here, you and your family were delighted to be back in the Bay Area. So I hope wherever you're going, it's as friendly and amenable and supportive as you've been to us here in the Bay Area. Thank you very much.
And you all the Bay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So next up is Rick Rhoads. Rick is our past president of Bay Planning Coalition and the vice president of Moffat and Nichol.
Thank you, Richard. Put this up here. I don't have any slides because I chose the option of following Illinois politics and selling my right to a slide to panelists. I don't have to turn back and look at the screen. Can everybody hear me okay? That's unfortunate for you. I'll go on nonetheless. Assuming you are like me and all the other board of directors, and if you are, I'm very sorry you're with me. Assuming you are, you probably wonder what it is John Coleman does all year. And I spend many nights wondering what that is, and I don't have the answer for that, by the way. I am going to give you a partial summary of what John does over the past year. Exactly 1 year ago today, I presided over a DMC panel that posed the question, LTMS, a new day, a new way. The question was posed given the profound changes we have seen in the dynamics of the day over the past 20 years. Was it time to revise how we conduct ourselves implementing the goals of LTMS? I believe the answer is yes. I'm no surprise to many of you. We need to change how we are implementing the LTMS. In May of 2011, I participated along with the Corps and other LTMS agency partners, namely EPA, and BCDC, in a value engineering study of the San Francisco District's dredging program, maintenance dredging program. The study identified 88 separate ideas, from which 26 alternatives were developed. 11 alternatives were identified as most critical, and 15 were included for further review. To date, I am happy to report the district has either completed or is in the process of implementing 16 of those alternatives. Another 6 are in preliminary discussions for potential implementation. 3 have been deferred, requiring either external or management action, and 1 has been deferred since it is believed it will not be beneficial to the program. I commend the district for further actions in this regard. In December 2011, the executive directors of the California Marine Affairs and Navigation Conference, CMAC, and the Bay Planning Coalition convened a meeting with interested stakeholders and drafted a set of talking points for subsequent discussions with the LTMS managers in hopes of further advancing revisions to the way we implement the LTMS. These talking points are as follows. Number 1 is reclassify dredge material as a resource rather than a waste in order to allow for an expanded interpretation and application of beneficial reuse opportunities within the bay in light of the sediment deficit to the bay and ongoing climate change. Number 2, allow for greatly expanded and unconstrained use of knockdowns and other agitation-type practices during intervening years in order to allow for biannual or greater dredging cycles. Number 3, encourage the use of advanced maintenance dredging in order to allow for biannual or greater dredging cycles. Number 4, dramatically reduce the frequency of sediment testing where it can be demonstrated from historical testing records that concerns regarding potential sediment contamination are not warranted. Number 5, consolidate multiple core dredging contracts into a single larger contract in order to increase competition and spread disposal costs related to beneficial reuse, effectively bringing down the unit rate of disposal. Number 6, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers must adopt and meet project schedules. Number 7, reevaluate the dredging work window, especially the front end of the windows, and implement dredging closer to the front end of the windows.
Speak up, please.
Number 8, reevaluate water management requirements for beneficial reuse sites, i.e. keeping material in a wet state for several years until breaching occurs, as these requirements are discouraging development of upland sites, which is contrary to LTMS goals. And number 9, consultation with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers year-round. Since then, the BPC and CMAC executive directors have met once with the district commander and once with the LTMS managers, and the following have been agreed to. The district will take the lead in making the DMMO database public. The district will keep to their schedule. Bay Planning Coalition and CMAC executive directors will jointly take the lead on reviewing how to implement bullet number 1, which is reclassifying dredge material as a resource rather than waste. BCDC will take the lead on reviewing how to implement bullet number 2, which is the greatly expanded and unconstrained use of knockdowns and other agitation-type practices. The district will take the lead on reviewing how to implement bullet number 3 regarding advanced maintenance dredging. The LTMS agencies will take the lead on bullet number 4, reducing the frequency of testing, especially on regularly dredged channels, utilizing data from the previous year for the upcoming dredge cycle. And lastly, at future LTMS meetings, the LTMS managers will ask staff to provide their vision for what the LTMS process is and should be. At this point, all parties plan to meet on May 2nd to report progress back to the group and discuss next steps. Some may say this is not enough, and I certainly believe it is not enough. But all things combined, it is a very good start for 1 year's effort in trying to make change. I commend everyone involved for recognizing the problems we have and joining the collaborative process to identify economical solutions. I particularly commend the LTMS managers for recognizing the importance of our concerns and evaluating these discussions within their respective organizations. Particularly, I believe it was Alexis Strauss that first championed this about 2 or 3 years ago, and I give her a lot of credit for opening this discussion up with us. While all this is great, though, we must increase the sense of urgency to implement these changes. It's got to change. Just heard last week that what I was told is that the district currently this year plans to only dredge Richmond and Oakland this year. I've said in the last couple of years that we're on a path to where Oakland is the only place that gets dredged, and that's a shame, and we have to implement changes to prevent that. Thank you for your attention and interest in this matter.
Okay, Rick, thank you very much. And finally on the panel is Isaac Kos-Read. For those of you who haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting Isaac, he is the relatively new Director of External Affairs at the Port of Oakland. We were lucky here in the Bay Area, came back to his adopted hometown from the Port of Los Angeles. So he's brought tremendous insight into the maritime industry and the port industry, and will provide us with some further remarks on the dredging issue.
I believe in following the Colonel's lead. That's always a safe option. So I'm going to take the mic out and speak direct into it. So you're probably wondering why Director of External Affairs on a panel about dredging. And they say, you know, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So for me, one of the things that's compelling about the dredging challenge, the dredging issue, is how we communicate it and how we talk about it. You know, some people's eyes glaze over when you go out externally to DC and you try to talk about dredging and why you need to spend millions of dollars keeping channels deep. But we found out a way to speak about it in a compelling fashion. I want to throw out a paradigm shift. You heard Supervisor Wilma Chan say, you know, we went from 25 feet and we're still working on getting down to 50 feet. And we all know that in this room that that's not correct, right? We all know that we got to 50 feet, right? We celebrated, we had a big press conference, and that what we need to do is keep ourselves at 50 feet, keep the channel at 50 feet. And so we need to keep it deep, keep it deep. And to keep it deep, there's really two strategies. There's getting more money out of DC, and
and lowering the cost of doing it locally, right? It's real simple. Lower costs, bring in more money. A lot of people have talked about ways we can lower costs here in the region by working together, streamlining all that. And I don't think we need to belabor those points anymore. So I'm going to talk briefly. Dredging in a way that's compelling by talking about people. The Port of Oakland did an economic impact analysis based on 2010 data, and we just recently published a brochure that conveys this information. It talks about powering jobs and empowering communities. And we went out and actually found real people hold jobs. You know, we throw around the 73,000 number, and who are these 73,000 people? Well, all of us in this room and thousands of other people who work throughout this entire region. So I'm going to talk briefly about some of these results because I want to make sure to arm you all with some information that will help you become ambassadors and advocates externally, not just amongst ourselves, but externally about how we can make the case for more money coming into dredging. So I'm actually going to take a walk back up here because I like to move around when I talk. And unfortunately, you can't see it too well here, but hopefully you'll be able to tell that every one of these people, there's I think 13 photos I hope up here, every one of these people's jobs is actually tied to the Port of Oakland, whether you're talking about Grand Park Company out in the Central Valley, where if you've ever had a cutie, you know those little clementine mandarins? Yeah, well that's the guy, he ships all of his product through the Port of Oakland. Whether you're talking about Muhabir, a trucker here at the Port of Oakland, his job directly depends on our making sure that those channels get dredged. Whether you're talking about Jamin Park, an engineer who helps us build shore power on our docks. Again, the money that's paying for the shore power infrastructure that's going to help clean our air is money that comes from the ships that come through those channels that are dredged. And so by telling the story of these people, we're hopefully going to make a compelling case for why the federal government should continue to invest in the port. You know, when you talk about people, you obviously have to talk about where they live. So the first thing we did was we looked at, okay, you know, of all the 73,000 jobs and those direct jobs, where are they based? And we realized, of course, as Supervisor Chan pointed out, the majority of them are in Alameda County. But even though we're called the Port of Oakland, we and our sister ports throughout the region, Richmond, Stockton, all the way out to Sacramento, are all generating jobs throughout the entire region. Some of those pictures on the cover, and you can, by the way, get a copy of this brochure. Some of those pictures are people who have their job in San Francisco or the job all the way out in Sacramento. But it's tied to what goes through the Port of Oakland. And if you look out beyond the 9-county Bay Area, you realize that this is really this is the port for the entire Northern California mega region, which really reaches all the way down from Oregon, down into the Central Valley, probably even past Fresno, certainly out to Reno and all the way to the Golden Gate. I mean, you read stories in the newspapers about Coda Automotive based in Benicia now. It's like, why did this new electric car company choose the Bay Area? So they could be nearby the Port of Oakland. The only way you're going to get new cars shipped out of the bay or new car parts in is with dredged channels. Next slide. And of course, beyond just the region, the port is connected through our dredged channels across to the economy of the entire country. Now, predominantly, you'll notice we are in fact connected to import and export trade throughout the entire country, but certainly predominantly in California. And by the way, this is something that we have the potential to change by working together to bring more cargo in and out of this port. In addition to the jobs that are generated, we also like to talk about the tax revenue that all this hard work generates. There's over $617 million in local, state, and federal taxes that are generated by all the business that comes through the port. And as Supervisor Chan also mentioned, these are good jobs. You know, the workforce on the waterfront and throughout those 73,000 jobs across the region is heavily unionized, and they pay really solid wages. And along the way, all the money that the port spends, whether it's with some of you in this room or others, also supports a lot of local and disadvantaged businesses throughout the region. And I think it's been said, but I think it's important to mention again what Jock McConnell said about the importance of exports. I mean, we are, and it's not just the Port of Oakland, but all of our sister ports in the region are primarily focused on exports. And that's something that's a priority for the nation because, of course, if we can export more, we can generate a lot more jobs at home. And again, these largely heavy exports, by the way, are really contingent on us having well-dredged channels. Okay, now the boring part, we talk about the infrastructure. Well, we've actually had a lot of success going out in DC over the last couple of years and getting more money. You know, we started original operations maintenance allocation at the beginning of last year was less than half of what we ended up with. We got a plus up of about $11 million thanks to the hard work of Congressman Barbara Lee, Congressman John Garamendi, and I want to recognize, by the way, I think we have representatives from both of those offices here, Lupe Schoenberger and Colin Ford. I don't know if you could just raise your hand. They all deserve you know, our thanks for their hard work in Congress to make sure we get enough money out of DC, which, as we all know, is not an easy thing to do these days. Also, Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer have long been champions. And one of the ways that we've been effective is by building partnerships with a lot of our ag export partners. Because they know that even though they may be operating down in Fresno or Bakersfield, that unless the San Francisco Bay Channel is dredged, they're not going to be successful in getting their products to market. So this year, we're actually starting at the same level in terms of budget allocation that we ended last year with. So we're starting this year on a real strong base of about $17 million. That's up from where we started last year, not quite to where we want it to be. And so again, we're going to have to embark on this annual Keep It Deep campaign where we go back to DC, whether it's with the Bay Planning Coalition or with our own separate organizations. We have to be going back to DC and talking in a compelling fashion with our legislators and the administrative agencies about the need to continue to invest in dredging in the San Francisco Bay. And by the way, do so instead of wasting money on dredging new channels around this country. You know, Jock O'Connell mentioned the Panama Canal. And there could be no, I mean, there probably is a greater fraud that could be pulled on people, but it would be a huge mistake for our country collectively to start doing all the hard work. It's been $500 million of public and private money invested to get us down to 50 feet. And we would see that wasted and regenerated if the Panama Canal opens and people say, oh, well, now we need to dredge channels in Savannah and Charleston and here and there. And look, I'm not saying that there won't be some diversion and there won't have to be some accommodation of infrastructure in those gateways, but let's, in this era of scarcity, protect what we've got here already in existence on the West Coast. And so we need to continue to keep it deep, and also keep in mind, and this is starting to happen in DC, the connection between the dredged infrastructure, the water, what I call the water side infrastructure, and the infrastructure investment we need to make on land. So of course, I have a picture here of the Oakland Army base development, which is going to be critical when we bring those huge ships in, like the MSC Fabiola, that came in. We not only have to have the deep channels, but we have to have the adequate landside infrastructure to get goods on and off those huge ships. To close, I just want to say, join us. We have a website set up, portofoakland.com/powering-jobs, where you can get connected. You can download a copy of the jobs brochure, use it freely, disseminate it, send it around, and please get connected with the port, and thank you.
Thanks, Isaac. So we are now ready for your questions. We've got Joe and Doug who are coming around. I'll actually take the question and read it. Do you have one over there, Isaac?
I don't, but...
Oh, Fiddle has a question?
No.
Is that for you?
Yeah, it was just
Okay.
well, I'll just state it. Yeah, Rick kind of said, hey, we're only doing Oakland Enrichment this year. That's what we're doing by contract, Oakland Enrichment. We are using the SA-ONS, the government dredge hopper, to again do yearly the main ship channel, Pinole Shoals, Richmond, Outer Bay, and Sassoon, all by government dredge. So pulling that down from the District of Portland.
Okay, so we'll be collecting cards. I do have one here, but I wanted to at least get the panelists an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard, or ask maybe each other a question while we're still collecting some cards. So far I have one card, so just wanted to give you, Jim, Rick, Lieutenant Colonel, Isaac, the opportunity to...
I have continued to pay at least some attention to dredging. And one of the things that I did, you know, as you probably guess, I'm pretty much a nerd. I kind of read all this stuff. And I went through all the spreadsheets since the LTMS and looked at what had been done in terms of beneficial reuse and why, what was going out to the ocean. And I want to come back to how close a call it was on the 50-foot project. Of the beneficial reuse that's been done, 14 million cubic yards came directly from the Port of Oakland's 50-foot project. And when John Andrew and I and the engineering staff at the Corps and the Port put together the environmental documents for that, our estimates were that it would cost about 20 million more to reuse all the material and take it to the ocean, but the Port of Oakland would only pay 8. If we had known that it would cost 80 million more, I could have never sold that to the Port of Oakland. So in terms of creating an environment to reuse dredge material, to sustain bay wetlands and restore them against sea level rise, we are going to have to change. Without that 14 million cubic yard would have all gone to the ocean, and I would imagine without the Port of Oakland initiating the Hamilton project in Montezuma, the million cubic yards that came from the Port of Enrichment would have not gone there with 300,000 or so from Montezuma. So costs are a big issue, and there's reasons for that.
I just wanted to say one other thing. Someone mentioned the sense that whether or not there's a sense of urgency about these things. And I wanted to throw out a couple of sobering numbers about the Port of Oakland that hopefully will convey a sense of urgency. And this relates to what, again, John McConnell said about making completely wrong predictions about where the economy is headed. The Port of Oakland is sitting on about $1.4 billion in debt, which was, of course, used to build a bunch of infrastructure on the maritime area primarily. And we're currently operating about 55% capacity. Okay? Now, that's not quite as bad as the airport example that John McConnell gave, but still try financing $1.4 billion in debt on half of what you were hoping in terms of business. And we're competing with places like the Port of Los Angeles. Port of Los Angeles is already, of course, the #1 container port in the country. And when I was there, we used to brag that we shipped to every congressional district in the country. So if we think we can take this for granted that, oh yeah, well we always have local and regional cargo here at the port, we don't have to worry about that. You know, we only have to worry about that 15% discretionary. That's wrong. We can become a backwater port. We can silt up and go away, and other ports would happily take our business. And those ports, Port of LA, I just watched a video. They're spending $300 million a year. $300 million a year on their own on their capital program. Our entire budget, airport, seaport, commercial real estate, is just under $300 million a year. Okay, so that's what we're competing with. And so we as a region really have to take competition very seriously when we think about this. And the last number real quick is that 5 of our 7 maritime leases are coming up in the next 5 years. 5 of our 7 maritime leases. That's over $100 million in revenue. And so when we negotiate those leases, if we can't say without question that we've got 50 feet solid every year, no questions asked, you better believe that's going to make those lease negotiations tough.
All right, we have 2 questions which I think are related, and I think they could be answered by anyone on the panel, so I'll throw them both out there. One of them is, what will it cost per year to stay at minus 50 feet? And how do we get the money to do so? I think we've talked about it, but let's be a little bit more specific. What is the projected cost to stay at 50 feet? And how do we get the money that we need? How do we secure that?
I'll start out with the rough cost. Al, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it's roughly $22 million to stay year to year. And that's what we put in for our priorities. And the Congress racks and stacks, or the administration racks and stacks the priorities. And then as the money goes down, they say, keep taking a 10% cut year on year on year. You get less every year. One of the other things that we keep bringing up is the cost of doing dredging by contract in the Bay Area is roughly $22 to $25 a cubic foot. The average across the United States is $2 to $3 a cubic foot. Some of that may be, Mississippi where they side cast it all. But when we bring in the government hopper too, to do Richmond, and they drop it at Alcatraz, that's anywhere from about $5 to $10 a cubic foot. So we have wide varying when we have to contract it, when we have to take it to a deep ocean disposal site. The less restrictions we have, the more depth we can gain with the limited money we're getting.
Okay, and then
How do you get more money?
was, how are we going to get the money?
Well, like I said, I mean, we're doing a decent job, and what's working is, first of all, just re-educating everybody. That paradigm shift I was talking about. People thought we were done and that there's no more worrying about dredging. So that's an ongoing process because people really get stuck in whatever was the paradigm of 5 or 10 years ago. So it was a wake-up call when we first showed up in DC and said, Congressman Barber-Lee, we're here to talk about dredging. What? I thought we were done with that. So re-education and staying on message about keeping it deep and building allies building alliances with people who carry a lot of weight back in DC is also important. And we have a great partnership with a group called Nisei Farmers League. Manuel Cunha is a leader in the Central Valley, serves on the Federal Reserve Board, very, very, very compelling guy, very, very persuasive guy. And he represents, the almond farmers and everybody. And I think, those are all about our annual campaign, but we also need to be looking at the bigger global structural issues. And one of those is around what's called the harbor maintenance tax. We can't keep banging our heads against the same wall every year, although, we will if that's the only way to do it. We also need to address an issue where the federal government's sitting on a $6 billion surplus of money that's paid largely by major ports like Oakland, LA, and Long Beach, that it doesn't spend every year. Instead, it uses its deficit offset. So it's basically sitting on a pile of cash that's offsetting deficit somewhere else in the federal budget, instead of being spent on what it's intended for, which is harbor maintenance dredging. So we've made, I think, incredible strides. Some of you in this room are probably part of making those strides. I know the Bay Planning Coalition has been a leader on this. In going back to DC and saying, this is idiotic. We have to solve these basic problems structurally and make sure that the harbor maintenance money gets spent every year on what it's intended for. So we need to continue to pound away at that long-term issue. And then also look at, these cost discrepancies are stunning, and they don't exist just around dredging. We are a high-cost gateway. Part of it is our leadership on environmental issues, which of course supports and we embrace, but we have to try somehow to level the playing field, and one of the things that we've been pushing for a long time is what we call a national goods movement policy. When people, for example, target the Port of Oakland for whatever reason, and potentially try to end up diverting cargo away from our port, they're diverting it to ports that don't face the same high labor standards, the same high environmental standards, and recognition around that is also important.
I just want to add one more thing. When I bring up the costs, that's just a data point. I'm not here to say, hey, the environment needs to go the way. We don't want to go back to dredge lock or dredge lock of Alcatraz of 20 years ago where we can't dredge, where people don't trust our sediment testing and they think what we're putting in the bay is bad. I think what we have done is great, but there are some restrictions. Probably we need to bring the pendulum a little bit back to the median. So again, dredge lock, probably the opposite side of the pendulum where nobody trusted what we did. Probably here, we're pretty much the pendulum swung kind of far the other way. Through BCTC, LTMS efforts, we are starting to bring the pendulum back through programmatic efforts and trying to bring things where the juice is worth the squeeze on the environmental restrictions, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Excellent. There are two questions here that are, again, somewhat related. Lieutenant Colonel, you'll get the first one. The question is, Rick Rhoads urged the Corps to have a greater sense of urgency. What can the private sector do to help facilitate the Corps' work and make it easier for the Corps to do its job?
I would say the first thing, and Rick has brought it up through John Coleman and Rick and Jim Hausner, just keep pushing us. Keep asking for the meetings. Keep asking, where are you at on this? we talked about this. This is where it was a year ago. I wouldn't say wait yearly. I would say come up to the LTMS meetings, ask for an office call with the commander. Hey, we talked about this 6 months ago. I haven't heard any feedback on it. What's up with it? Can you give me a sit rep? The Corps works for the ports. We're here to push and keep the channels deep in an environmentally sustainable way. So don't be afraid to reach out to the commander if you think it's kind of going slow and you need to find out what's your timeline, what's your internal timeline on this. All I hear is, yeah, we'll get to it. So stay engaged.
Excellent. And then, Isaac, you talked in a very compelling way about getting these funds. The question here is, what contingencies are in place if those funds aren't secure? Anyone on the panel can answer that, but what's the backup plan?
If I could, I think the premise of my comments are, it's wonderful and we should continue to try to get more money, but my God, if you just look at the news every day and you look at the condition of the world and U.S. economies, we are under incredible budgetary pressure. So certainly to just hope that we're going to get more money would be a little bit ridiculous. I think we really need to focus equally hard, if not harder, on doing more with less. The Colonel talks about, constant moves to reduce his budget 10% every year. That's not going to stop tomorrow. The U.S. isn't going to hit the lottery and all of a sudden everything's fine. This is going to go on for a long time. We have to do more with less. We have to reduce our unit costs for dredging and be more efficient at what we do. And a big part of what I've said in other meetings, at the CMANC meeting last fall in particular, is I just believe we need to stop picking it up. Dredging gets really expensive once you pick the material up, because now you have to do something with it. And it's not easy to find things to do with it. Hauling it to the ocean is a very expensive proposition. Finding upland disposal sites, placement sites, beneficial reuse sites has been proven to be a very expensive solution. Can we not pick up every yard? Absolutely not. There are some projects where we have to pick it up and deal with it. But there are many projects where we don't have to pick it up. Agitation dredging is used all over the world. It's used all over the Mississippi River. As far as I know, they're still part of the United States, so I think they operate under the same environmental laws we do. And we just need to be smarter about every yard we dredge. Because the hope that we're going to get more money, I think, is near fantasy.
Politics is the art of the possible, and I don't disagree that we need to do more with less. In fact, I would 100% echo all of those comments, and that maybe the return on investment for our energy is as great, if not greater there, than it is in going out and getting more money. But in the meantime, we will continue to try and go out and get more money. Now, if that doesn't materialize, beyond doing more with less and changing some of our regulations and practices locally, there are not a lot of contingencies. I mean, there's wait for the tides. Yeah, we'll lighten the load of the ship and wait for the tides so we can bring them in and out. That's not going to pass muster with the shipping industry. And they are highly mobile. They will move their ships elsewhere so fast. And the trend, of course, is toward bigger ships. I mean, this first one that we saw last month was only the beginning. I mean, anyone who's following the shipping industry is seeing that they're already contemplating 13 and even up to 18,000 TEU vessels, which not only are going to involve challenges with dredging, but other infrastructure.
Okay, here are two questions, shifting our geographic focus a little bit to the northern part of our Bay Delta system. This question is for the Lieutenant Colonel. What is the timing and commitment to complete dredging the government channel and plan depth to access the port of Stockton?
currently we have $800,000 to continue the study to deepen the Port of Stockton from, I think it's 30 to 35 or 35 to 40, one of those.
35 to 40.
35 to 40. It is a well, I wouldn't say funded, it's a economically strong port. It has over 1 million metric tons. It looks well with O&M dredging year to year. It is about 3 years behind what we've been studying to do at Sacramento. Sacramento Deepwater Ship Channel, we're trying to get that one deeper also. And we're kind of in a regulatory morass of trying to move and deepen the ship channel to Stockton and move X2 a little bit. And when I say a little bit, it's dry to dry, anywhere from 100 meters to, I'm thinking, 400 meters. And it is bringing out a lot of the knives on the regulatory side of, well, if we allow you to move X2 by deepening the channel, what are the water exporters going to say? And that's on the Stockton side. We've been working that one for about 3 years. This summer and later, we're working on getting through that regulatory morass and getting a record of decision for Sacramento. When we look at the modeling for Stockton, it is probably an order of magnitude of 5 times stronger on the X2 movement. So right now, I'm just trying to get through Sacramento on the X2 movement before we kind of focus our efforts on how do we attack Stockton. So again, Stockton's strong, viable. It gets great funding year to year on O&M. The deepening projects for those 2 ports as they're in the Delta, the first construction project to go on in about 20 years in the Delta, it's a pretty big challenge.
I see.
Now, I only want to add that this highlights the do more with less and also the national goods movement policy need, because when you talk about looking at port network, there's lots of different ways that port network can fit together, and it's not just through deep channels and deep ships. And so one of the aspects of the national goods movement policy that we almost push for is someone who's looking at multimodal evaluation of corridors. Should we do more barging that we're contemplating, for example, between regional ports, so that there's you don't have to dredge all ports to the same depth? Should you look at rail infrastructure into and out of certain ports? That sort of multimodal thinking, we can't just look at dredging in a vacuum. And so I think that again we have to encourage that kind of thinking in DC, as fancy as it may be sometimes.
Thank you. Here's a question for Jim. How do you see the education of our youth and young adults in helping to shape public interest in port activities and dredging?
I teach first graders to read and fourth graders and fifth graders advanced math and pre-algebra. I never talk about the environment. I never talk about the Port of Oakland. I don't think there's anything more critical or frankly rewarding than teaching a kid to read this time of the year. All my first graders, except one, you read very closely. It's grade level. I tell you, that's more fun than dredging.
Doesn't surprise me Jim had his moment of being a curmudgeon. I don't believe that's because I've talked to Jim about his teaching, and I assure you he brings his passion for the environment to that classroom somehow. Let's see, we've got a few more minutes. Isaac, why don't you take this one, and perhaps you can tell us what is the port's biggest public relations dilemma in convincing the public of the economic importance of ports to the Bay Area and Northern California? What is our biggest public relations challenge or dilemma, it says here?
Well, first, I don't want to brush off that last question, and maybe there's even a link between these 2 questions. We, I think, in ports have a long-term workforce development and educational challenge that we do need to address, and I don't think we're addressing it systemically. I would invite private industry in this room to join the conversation that I think is just starting to get going between the Oakland Workforce Investment Board, the Port of Oakland. It may be driven largely right now by the Oakland Army Base project, but I think addressing the long-term interest in education and focus is going to be important. You know, ports, historically, we talked about port cities. I mean, Oakland wasn't a city without its port, and that was true. It's true for all ports around the world. And there was a deep, deep, deep connection between the local community and the port. People woke up, heard the port, smelled the port, walked out, and went and worked at the port. And with containerization and the rise of freeways and suburbanization, there was a huge disconnect that formed that's affected every port, not only in the U.S., but I think particularly in the U.S. as well as around the world. Because when we talk to ports, when we go to the port of Busan in Korea, which is the 5th busiest container port in the world, they say, oh, Busan was nothing 40 years ago but a small little fishing village. Now it's this huge bustling city of like 3 million people. And they hate the port. They want it to turn into like, waterfront, park and destination. Well, Korea has the option of just saying, okay, now we're building a new port on the coast somewhere. And in fact, that's what they're doing. They're just moving the deep water port of Busan over like 20 miles away and building a major goods movement port between the two ports to facilitate the transition. We don't have that luxury. We're not building a new Port of Oakland. So the Port of Oakland has to figure out a way to serve, global interests and regional interests, but not alienate, and not only not alienate, but involve the local community. Bring the local community back into the circle of benefits of the port. Because when you had people who could work in the port and move away and live somewhere else, all that was left behind were the loud noises and the trucks and the, polluting ships. And of course, we've got much better data about all that pollution and whatnot. And none of us want to breathe the exhaust from a semi, or we may think, oh yeah, that's the smell of money, or that's the, we may sort of be nostalgic about some of that. But the reality is that it's not good, it's not healthy. And so I think the biggest public relations challenge long term for the port is to reach back deep into the local community, and locals not just immediate fence line, but within our city, and not only communicate benefits, but actually develop and deliver benefits that will help that community take pride in having one of the great ports of the world right in their backyard.
Just on that, the point also of education, it's a good time to acknowledge the fact that we have today helping us with this conference many cadet students from the California Maritime Academy, which is our local maritime academy in Vallejo. And we also have some students here as well. So let's give all of them a round of applause for their work. And the focus there, of course, is to continue this strong maritime tradition that has been such an important element and shaper of the culture and the region of San Francisco Bay. So we're more than delighted to have all the volunteers here. I also want to say something in terms of education. One of the objectives of the conference and one of the parts of the plan, of the program for the conference, was to make sure we are all on the same page, literally, when it comes to just the basic facts about the economic footprint of the maritime and industrial sector in San Francisco Bay. So in your program, we've included on pages 5 and 6 some basic facts. The idea was to make sure that all of us have the right information so that when we go out in whatever venue, conversation, regulatory discussion, or even working with our local communities, perhaps even in your neighborhood, you have the information. We are all really the coalition that's going to make the case for dredging and for the importance of the maritime sector in San Francisco Bay. So we wanted to provide that with you. That's our commitment to our ongoing education as part of Bay planning. So any final comments from our panelists before we conclude?
One thing that was mentioned obliquely, but I think we have to keep coming back to it, is there is an equity issue here. The shippers pay through the tariff, into the harbor maintenance tax fund, for everything that's necessary to cover their needs. So they are, in fact, paying their fair way, but the money doesn't come back. Less than 50% of it comes back. So, you know, that is a fundamental fact of life. But I think it is important for people to remember that on an equity issue, the shipping industry is, in a significant way, at least on the dredging side, paying more than they wish.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Again, it's been a great, not done yet, I got 2 more months, but it's been a great 2 years here, working with everybody, learning the issues. Again, all I got to say is stay engaged, keep bothering the colonel if necessary, keep bothering the Corps, try to see where we're at, and try to see the way ahead on some of our dredging issues to make it more efficient and to be an advocate either for the regulatory side, the environmental side, or, you know, to get after the dredging a little bit more. We're probably the only regulatory agency at the main ones on the federal side, I think BCDC on the state sides, that balances the environment with economic development. Some of our peers, they will tell you, I only look at this. I could care less about the costs. I could care less about that. So again, come visit us. We're great advocates. Hear the concerns and try to change the ship in a more, in a better direction that's better for all. Thanks.
Okay. Rick, any follow-up, any comments, or Isaac, anything to add? All right, so we've done fantastically well. Let's give a full round of applause. Now, obviously, just right on schedule. The sun has come out, so we've got a 15-minute fresh air and networking break.